Thanks for tuning in to The Real Deal Show, brought to you by eBodyboarding.com and Tribe Boards. Well, howdy fans, Jay Reale here with The Real Deal Show, and this is my last episode of The Real Deal Show for 2022. This is going to be a quick solo show. I just wanted to thank everybody for your support. I've put out 67 episodes of The Real Deal Show since I started it back in 2021, this being the 68th show, and it is New Year's Eve 2022 as I record this. And what I wanted to do this episode is just kind of go over the best of 2022. It's been done by a couple other podcasts, most notably Informed, the guys down in Australia that put out that podcast. They did sort of a year recap, and I thought it was a great idea just to do it from my perspective here at eBodyboarding.com. So without any further ado, oh, by the way, thank you to all my guests throughout the past year. I had some really great interviews throughout 2022. Partially because I was able to travel on a couple events of the IBC World Tour as a commentator for the webcast, which hopefully you watched. We'll touch on the IBC in just a moment, but I was able to interview several world champions, including Amory Laverne, Pierre-Louis Costas, Tristan Roberts, Neymar Carvalho, Sadio Hara, Jeff Hubbard, Dave Hubbard, and the list just goes on. Dave was in 2021 that I did my interview with him. So more to come for 2023, folks, and I will get into that at the very end. So let's start out with product trends for 2022. I think the main product trend in the bodyboarding world was multiple channel bodyboards, multi-channel boards. So everyone seemed to jump on that bandwagon of quad channels, 5 channels, single to double concave. So that seems to be, I should say, not seemed, but seems to be where the innovation is coming in the bodyboarding world, is moving to playing with the bottom contours on the boards. There's a trend that comes and goes every once in a while in the sport and in board design, and that seems to be the current trend du jour, as they say. Whether they work or not is up to you. Some people love the multi-channel boards, some don't. I personally have never tried one. I still rock the standard graduated channels, which is it's an innovation for me, because when I started bodyboarding and for the first decade, there were no channels on the bottom of bodyboards, really. That was not a common thing. And bodyboards were super thick back then. We were riding 2.5 inch, 2 3/4 inch thick boards. Those were stock boards back in the beginning of my bodyboarding career. So things have come a long way as far as I'm concerned since then. In our own line of boards, the Tribe brand, of course, next to me here, my Real Deal model. I've gone with my current model. I'm experimenting a little bit. This is the Real Deal 4.0, and this one has a half stringer in it. So the stringer actually just comes up slightly past the midway point to allow the nose to flex. But what's going to keep it from overflexing is a layer of what they call Skin Tech. The factory that makes our boards has this proprietary stiffener. It's essentially like a slick with mesh embedded, and they put it under the deck. It makes the board pretty solid, and you can have a board with a lower density PP core and keep the weight down and actually kind of break it in over time. So that's what I have on this board is the half stringer, and Vicky's model, the Bungee, has the same thing. Also, from our brand, we have a whole bunch of different board bags. I will link at the bottom of the description if you're watching on YouTube instead of listening to the audio podcast. I'll link my video that goes over all the board bags that we have in the eBodyboarding and Tribe line. Okay, what about our business, eBodyboarding.com? We are moving into what will soon be our 24th year in business. We started in 1999. We're coming up on 2023, and April 15th will mark the beginning of our 24th year. So we thank you all for all that epic support over the years. The bodyboarders have been so kind and supportive of our business, and we super appreciate that, believe me. There's been some ups and downs over the years, you know. Some of you may remember the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008. That was a rough period for our business. COVID. When COVID hit, man, we thought we were going to be in deep trouble. We really had to cut back on expenses, and we lost a couple employees, and we thought, man, this is going to be the nail in the coffin of eBodyboarding. But as it turned out, quite the opposite happened. We ended up having, probably the busiest, well, not probably, definitely the busiest period of time we've ever had in eBodyboarding.com's history. And it turns out that with everything else closed, that means youth sports, gyms, shopping malls, movie theaters, all of that shut down. The beach was one of the few places that people could go, at least in this country, for the most part. There were a few touch and go periods where certain beaches were closed, but all in all, a lot of people took up wave riding sports. And if you've noticed, your local beaches more crowded than ever before, well, sorry, I guess we're partially to blame for that. So it was a great year for outdoor recreation in general, I think. Bikes, fishing gear, whatever. Those industries really thrived during COVID. So we're pushing forward. It's not crazy busy like it was during those periods of time, that particularly 2021, but we're still, selling bodyboards and making people smile, which is really cool. Okay, I have a few notes here next to me. Let's move on and talk about contests. What a great year for competition. It was the first full year for the IBC World Tour. IBC Tour is based in Chile. And I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys. I didn't know anything about the IBC Tour. I helped to start the GOB World Tour. I was a board member and wrote press releases for the GOB World Tour. So I had a lot of involvement with that tour, which started in the mid-90s. And that went for a while until it became eventually the IBA Tour. And that tour thrived in the early 2000s, and then it moved to the APB Tour, a lot of acronyms here. And then the APB Tour was starting to languish, really. Hard to get sponsorship dollars for big international competitions, and most of the events were really subsidized by municipalities, recreation departments in various countries or cities, rather than big companies sponsoring the events. And things were sort of languishing, and then COVID hit. Things got kind of rough, but in that period just before that, the IBC, which is made up of some really passionate folks, the CEO of which is Glenn Cuevas, a super top-notch guy from Chile that now lives in Europe with his wife, but goes back and forth. That guy, I got to meet him this year when I became involved with the IBC Tour. I'll get to that in a minute. I honestly had kind of stopped following competitive bodyboarding a number of years ago, actually. I just didn't really have much interest in it. Too busy. The times that the events were on didn't really correspond with, times that I was awake, quite frankly. Most of the events, in fact, all the events were overseas. And it was just, something that wasn't really important in my life to follow, and I just didn't have the time to sit there and watch heats. Sometimes we'd have it on in the background. We'd see a few heats or whatever here and there, and I always enjoyed watching the highlight packages. which were short and right to the point, you know, the 3-4 minute highlight packages. But IBC really stamped their presence on the sport this year with an absolutely successful first full year of a world tour. They had several events on the tour. All the top riders in the world, including several former world champions, supported the IBC World Tour. And as you can imagine, being based in South America, in Chile, that was sort of the focal point of the beginning of the IBC World Tour for this year. Events in Chile, also in Brazil, and then, you know, the tour moved over to Europe, and that's where I kind of jumped on. Thankfully, Bego Martinez, who you also all know from commentary on the World Tour for many years, reached out to me, and I was able to fly to the Maldives, which is a dream bucket list location for me, and I got to go over there and be one of the webcast commentators. Super, super honored to be a part of that event, and it was great. Some real standouts in that event. But let's go back a little bit. So the contest year really sort of began, as far as I know, down there in Central America, the Bocas Invitational in Panama, on the Caribbean side of Panama. And that event it was like the first year they had it. It got sort of on the radar at the very last minute. They announced the event was happening. And some of the top guys went down there, including Mike Stewart. He showed up for the event. Winning the event, Dave Hubbard won the drop knee. Isabella Souza won the women's. And, of course, Sammy Moratino won the men's. So Sammy, 4-time drop knee world champion, took out that inaugural event. It's happening again this year. That's going to be the end of January into early February. I should put also a link to that event here in the description for those of you watching on YouTube. And that's going to be, you know, potentially another epic year for that event with more people competing. Highlights from IBC World Tour. Let's talk about Arica. Arica is in Chile. The Arica Challenge always produces epic surf. I don't think I've ever seen it where it didn't have some incredible waves, and it's super gnarly. The wave itself is kind of crazy. The end section in that wave is real dangerous. Amory Laverne took out that event with a perfect score, 20 points, and that was an epic way for Amory to start the World Tour out. And moving to, you know, other highlights of the IBC Tour, Maldives. Let's talk about the Maldives event. The Visit Maldives Pro happened in late July, early August. It was at a spot called Varunula Ralugandu. I'm amazed I still remember how to say that. They had us practicing how to pronounce that for a couple weeks leading up to the event. And as a commentator, you want to be able to pronounce the name of the venue correctly out of respect for the locals, who, by the way, were so hospitable. The Maldives Bodyboarding Association brought everybody to Maldives. They were super, super friendly. They shared their waves with us. They shared their culture with us. They took us out on boat trips out to the other atoll islands in the atoll there, and we scored incredible waves and had so much fun down there. You probably have seen, hopefully you've seen my video on here on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, on the Bodyboarding Travel playlist of my recap of that event, my behind the scenes, I guess you could say, of that event. Amazing waves too. So that spot produced peaky waves with ramps, barrels, warm water. The water is in the low to mid 80s the entire time. It's very tropical there in the Maldives, there in the Indian Ocean, if you're unfamiliar with that place. And Dave Hubbard was the dominator in the men's. He won both the prone, or the men's open, and the drop knee. And Amory Laverne, second place in both the men's open and the drop knee. So that was pretty amazing. And Isabella Souza also dominating in that event in the women's. Juniors was a young man from the Canary Islands, Gabriel Molina. And just a phenomenal event, man. Everybody was treated like royalty there in the Maldives. So hopefully that event will be back, excuse me, again in 2023. Let's talk about Jeff Hubbard. We talked about Dave Hubbard winning in the Maldives. And he's, by the way, now 9-time world champion by virtue of taking out Sintra over there in Portugal. And that got him his 9th world title to match Mike Stewart's 9 world titles. So will Dave Hubbard get another world title and become the winningest professional bodyboarder in the history of the sport? Got to watch the tour for 2023. But Jeff Hubbard, his older brother, Jeff, at age 46, doing the tour, just select events, shows up in South Africa and takes out the Walker Bay Pro and backs that up by turning 47 at the Frontone King event and winning the event just a couple days after his 47th birthday. And I will put a link to my interview with Jeff Hubbard also in the description for those of you watching on YouTube, so you can see my interview with Jeff just a couple of days before that win. And he won the event against Tristan Roberts, who was ripping through the entire event before getting injured. But despite the injury, got slammed on the bottom, hurt his back, and came back for the final day and made it to the final against Jeff. Jeff, by the way, took out Alan Munoz, the Chilean, who was in the running for the world title, a longtime veteran of the tour, and a heartbreaking loss for Alan Munoz. And he does not manage to win the world tour because Jeff takes him out, just as Jeff did back in 2019. Take out the contender for the world title to pave the way for Tristan Roberts a second time. So Tristan won the world title back in 2019. There was no tour in 2020, 2021 due to COVID. So Tristan held that title by default for like 3 years and backed it up by making the final and becoming world champ again. And Jeff Hubbard blew minds in the final against Tristan by getting an absolutely screamer of a wave towards the end of the final, launching a giant ARS, landing it, and the crowd erupted. And you've seen it probably all over social media, that Jeff Hubbard not slowing down in the least at age 47. So really pushing those boundaries, much like Kelly Slater does in surfing. At 50 years old, coming up on 51, by the way, for Slater. So Tristan Roberts, an absolutely amazing champion. Also an interview with him I will link down below. So lots of links to check out down below here in the description if you're on YouTube. And he takes his 2nd world title. Isabella Souza wins the world title for the women by taking out the event in South Africa, the Walker Bay Pro. So Isabella now, I can't think how many world titles she's won. Maybe 6, 5, 4, I forget. I lose track of this, but she is one of the most incredible female bodyboarders to ever lay on a bodyboard. Super powerful, super technical, and a really talented rider. So a great year for the IBC Tour. Let's also talk about briefly the APB Tour. Now, this is a North American-based tour that features a few different events. Garden Isle Classic over there on Kauai, the Taino Pro in Puerto Rico, an event over here as well. That's the Bodyboarding US Festival. And Sammy Moritino takes the win on that tour along with Ayaka Suzuki Krilly. So congrats to those two. Jared Houston shows up at the Puerto Rico event because, of course, he lives there and runs a bodyboarding camp down there. And Jared wins the event in Puerto Rico at Middles. Sammy wins the DK there. Ayaka won the women's, and as we mentioned, Sammy and Ayaka APB Tour ranking winners. Here in California, we had 3 events on the California Bodyboarding Alliance. Their second year running events here in California. Santa Cruz was one of the events. Oceanside, and there wasn't supposed to be an event in Imperial Beach, but it didn't happen because of water pollution. Got canned twice, but it still may happen in 2023. They're still hoping to get an event off. So California Bodyboarding Alliance, super cool events that they run. You definitely want to be a part of those if you're in California and like to compete. Let's talk about travels. So our family, we like to travel, as you know. We're not rich, so when you see on social media us traveling all over the world, here's how we do it, folks. And I'll get into this at another time. But just to scratch the surface, we have credit cards that you accumulate points. You can use those points to get plane tickets, hotels, airfare. So a lot of our purchases through the business use a card that gives us points, allows us to travel. I definitely encourage you guys to look into that. This is totally off the mark of the year in review for bodyboarding, but just a side thing about travel. Yeah, for sure. There's a website called thepointsguy.com. I would encourage you to check out that site. And I'll put that in the show notes as well down below for you YouTubers watching on YouTube. And the Points Guy has a lot of good information about what the best credit cards are to accumulate the most amount of points that you can use for travel. COVID was a great time to travel domestically here in the U.S. if you were able to. Plane tickets were super cheap. The airlines had cut back their flights, and so they were desperate to get people on planes, and tickets were cheap. We took a lot of trips during that time, we're trying to keep it going for 2023. I'll get into that in a minute. Let's talk about podcasts. What other podcasts are out there for bodyboarding? Of course, there should be no other besides the Real Deal Show, but quite honestly, the first bodyboarding podcast I ever remember was Patty Serrano. She used to interview some of the top pros and put it on the internet. We're going back, 12, 14 years ago, before there was such a thing as a podcast. So she was, in my eyes, the pioneer of that realm. Nowadays, podcasts include Manny Vargas's Book Life podcast. He's been doing that for a few years. He has a lot of episodes on the internet. You do have to pay to access those, at least at this point, at the end of 2022. That's the model that he has set up. But he has some great interviews. Those are getting a little sporadic these days as Manny's super busy with his surf trips. So good for you, Manny. Lay Boogie, that's Josh Kirkman's podcast. He's based in Australia. His are sort of sporadic, not on a regular basis. Informed, the guys in Australia, Dan Dobbin and his merry band of bodyboarders get on there and have a bash at the sport from many angles, talk about all kinds of stuff. It's kind of entertaining. And then Riptide magazine out of Australia, folded many years ago, but someone seems to have bought the intellectual rights to that name, and they've brought back Riptide, and that includes a podcast called Luke's Lounge with this guy Luke. Gosh, Luke O'Connor, is that your last name, Luke? I'm sorry, I can't remember. But anyway, Luke has interviewed many people, including Vicky. Another link at the bottom there for you for the YouTubers. And he's doing some really interesting interviews, some poignant questions for people that he interviews. So you might want to check out that. Social media, who do you like to follow? Well, for me, one of my favorites is the Sandy Beach Surf Report on Instagram. They have some hilarious videos. I won't get into details about them, but you should check them out. Sandy Beach Surf Report, really fun. Always fun to watch kook slams or kook of the day. Not that we enjoy other people's misery or accidents, but it's kind of fun to watch sometimes. And a friend of ours, Chad Stickney, he's been on this mission to bodyboard in all 50 states. Some of you may be familiar with Ben Gravy. He's a New Jersey surfer that has surfed in all 50 states. And Chad has kind of used Ben as a resource to find some of the waves that he's ridden, but he also has found his own. And I don't know how far along, maybe halfway through, maybe a little past halfway, but Chad's fun to watch on Instagram and on YouTube, where he has some great videos of some of the places that he's been. So that's my personal social media. So for 2022, my travels, we got some good trips in, folks. We started the year going to El Salvador with the Bodyboard Holidays crew. That's Rob Barber and company. I'll put the link to that at the bottom. In fact, I'm just going to put the Bodyboarding Travel link at the bottom. We were there in early February. Then we went to Tavarua in Fiji, our annual Tavi Tube Tour, which is our Fiji trip that anybody can book on. We just have nearly sold out for 2023. Tavi Tube Tour is a bucket list destination for anyone. We spent 2 weeks there. Following that, Vicky went over to Hawaii for a bit with our daughter to look at University of Hawaii, where she eventually did enroll and end up going. In May, we went to Texas and did our Texas Tube Tour at Waco Surf, the epic wave pool over there. That was a huge success. After that, we went to Maryland. I was blessed to be inaugurated into the Maryland Surfing Hall of Fame. Big honor, and thanks to the Ocean City Surf Club and my old hometown, Ocean City, Maryland, for putting me in that Hall of Fame. Following that, we went to Las Gaviotas, just northern Baja, quick trip with some friends. Right after that, went back down to Mexico to La Saladita, which is in mainland Mexico, not far from Ixtapa, Zihuatanejo. That was a quick one, about 3-4 days. And then I was in the Maldives for a good 2 weeks, late July, early August. Following that, Vicky took a quick trip with her friends to Nashville. That was obviously not a surf trip. It was a birthday bash for one of her friends. Then we went back to Texas again for another Texas Tube Tour in October. Amazing, amazing. We have video links again for those trips at the bottom, at the description for you watching on YouTube. And then after that, I went to the final event on the IBC Tour to be a commentator for the webcast again. That's the Fronton King. So that event, I was there in Canaries for about 12 days. Another great trip. Thank you, IBC. Then Vicky went with some girlfriends on a surf trip to Punta Mita in Mexico. Then we all went to Hawaii, our family, for just 3 days in November to visit our daughter in college. And now we've been home ever since. But the travels begin again in the beginning of January, and I'll get more into that in the future. We are planning to possibly do a vlog about our travels in 2023, so stay tuned for that. So with that said, I think I'm going to wrap it up. I've been babbling long enough, but folks, I'd love to know what or who you would like to see on The Real Deal Show in 2023. Please put it in the comments below. I know there's people that I haven't interviewed yet. All the interviews I've done have been in-person interviews. I haven't done one of these Zoom call type interviews yet. You need a certain kind of software, which is readily available, and I may look into that so I can expand my horizons in terms of who I'm interviewing, because there's so many people, so many good old friends that I want to get on here that are deserving of being interviewed. So stay tuned for 2023. There may be some breaks. I'm probably not going to get weekly Real Deal shows on the air on YouTube and podcasts just because of our travels and the availability of interview subjects, but I am certainly going to try to do weekly shows as much as possible. And once again, folks, I thank you so much for watching. And don't forget, on our Instagram, eBodyboarding.com Instagram, on the Instagram story, I do a daily surf report. I've been doing that for almost 3 years. I'm still in the water about 300 days a year, so I try to do a report from the beach every morning. And there's days I miss for various reasons. So if you don't see a report one day, it probably means I didn't surf. Otherwise, I'm doing a report. So that's it for 2022. The final day of 2022 is today. Tonight's the turnover to 2023. I want to wish everybody a very, very happy new year. Hope you have success and have a prosperous year in 2023. And we'll look forward to getting into what I will now call Season 3 of the Real Deal Show starting in 2023. Okay, folks, that's it, and I'll see you in the surf.